Good morning. And as I start off my thoughts with acknowledging how good it feels to say yes. It doesn't matter who you're talking to and what they're asking. It feels great to be able to turn and smile and say yes, giving them the permission or the thing or the time that they're requesting. If I ask you if you're coming to church on Sunday and you say yes, it makes me happy. It may upset your plans to sleep in, but put on the spot, you found it easier to say yes than come up with a plausible excuse. So we do say yes when we don't necessarily mean to or even want to. But sometimes the right answer is no, not because we want to say it, but because it is the right thing to say and do. Sometimes it's a question of self-denial. No thank you to the luscious slice of cake, or the reluctant no can do when deciding against flying off on a vacation because the priority is saving for a down payment on that house you've always wanted. It's packing lunch for work rather than joining your friends at the diner to save those pennies that you're going to need when the baby comes. And speaking of babies, there is nothing harder or more out of fashion today than saying no to your children. But it's the no's of mother and dad that add up to the discipline that makes for a productive life. And so much seems harmless. Why not let them occupy their free hours with games on their phone or computer? After all, how's that any different than the hours you spend in front of the TV? And does it really make any difference if they pierce their navel? You pierced your ears. Well, admittedly, you wear 17 and she is 7. And that tattoo she wants is kind of cute. And as we remind ourselves, children know more these days and want things earlier. The reality is that children always wanted things, and it's just whether they get them and when they do that we're discussing. And what about allowances? Do they come in part for chores or neat rooms or laundry folded and put away or shoveling the snow, or just because they need, or is it demand, some spending money? What are we teaching if we just give them their every whim without any concept of earning such things? If young adults feel entitled to their every wish, surely it is because that is what they've learned from our yeses. When you think back, what did you value more? The things you worked for and waited for, or the things just handed to you? I remember my father insisting that I save half the money required for our family's first record player. My desire for one grew and grew, and I took on every babysitting job offered. I saved and saved, and when the day came and we went to the store with my money and his, it was the greatest acquisition of my young life. And then, after I went to work full-time, I chose my silver service pattern. It was a trousseau sort of thing for the young girls in those days. I chose grand baroque, very expensive, and initially I could only manage to buy 1 or 2 pieces a year. But I always felt so pleased with myself as I brought home the new fork or spoon. And when I finally had the 5 pieces of a whole place setting, I treated myself to a very special, solitary dinner savoring this very special gift from me to me. 20 years later, I had 11 place settings, and my original plan for 12 wasn't going to be enough for fancy family dinners with the in-laws if my 5 children all got married. So my goal increased to 16, hoping for grandchildren as well. My husband, who thought the whole process silly, 1 new set a year, decided on a special present for Christmas. 5 settings awaited me under the tree. My set complete. He was so pleased with himself, and it was a lovely gesture. But the saving for my annual special treat was gone. Gratifying a desire is wonderful, but anticipating and working and saving for something you want adds a great deal to the acquisition. But it is something to be learned, and we don't learn it when things come too easily, and it leaves you handicapped when the skill is not acquired. Is there a new fear dominating families and workplaces today? Our parents and bosses and teachers and priests and police officers afraid to be responsible, to make decisions, take action, to be unpopular, if they do the right thing. Are we afraid the child will call the CAS and complain because they didn't get the new outfit or had to go to bed without dinner? Are we afraid the employee will call the human rights folk because they were sent home to change into a more work-appropriate outfit? Are teachers refusing to give detentions or honest marks because of parents complaining to their principal or their school board or yelling at them? Are priests confining their homilies to popular topics lest their congregation departs en masse at being told what is right to do? Are police reluctant to do the things that make for a safe community, lest they end up on charges of discrimination or abuse? Is it that we are afraid to speak openly about things that need to be said because of the power of the woke folk, the threat of being cancelled, and the dangers of the internet? Or is it just that it's so much easier to say yes and give folk what they want, rather than no when that is what they need? And who doesn't want to be popular? I assure you, being the heavy is never a fun place to be. Are we becoming a timid people, afraid to pass on our values and beliefs, lest we offend others? Are we afraid to discipline our children, lest they deem us selfish monsters? Do we neglect the responsibility which lies in decisions made and enacted, rather than passing the buck and leaving young minds to flounder without direction? We do not toss children in at the end of the dock until we teach them how to swim. We need to adopt the same teachings in other parts of our lives. We need to get back to being responsible for doing our jobs within our families and not leave the hard parts of saying no to some unknown soul in the future. Have we forgotten how to say no with love because only yes is sought? Learning is hard, but a great satisfaction comes from acquiring a new skill or a new language or a new discipline. But when parents go to school to complain that the teacher is too hard on their child, rather than helping the child to work and conquer their failings, they are setting their child up for future failure. There inevitably are tough times in anyone's life, and the sooner a child learns how to deal with disappointment and failure and rise to the challenge once more, the better off they will be. When an adult son asks his mother to call his boss about his hangover absence, she is failing him if she makes that call. Learning to take responsibility for one's actions is another necessary lesson. A lesson we are never too young to learn is how to stand up for ourselves in a civilized and honest manner. And the sooner we learn it, the easier the lesson. We need to be responsible for the things we do, both the right ones and the wrong. And we need to learn to seek forgiveness and to learn how to forgive. Responsibility needs to be learned and earned, and we learn it in small increments. We learn it when, having bugged our parents for a dog for ages, we make the deal to walk and feed and clean up after the dog. But the lesson is really only learned the morning when the parents knock on your door and say, "Your dog, your chores," and no, we're not going to walk it. So get up and get going, whether it's raining or not. We learn when we go home and complain about the mean teacher or the mean colleague or the mean boss. Is the query, "What did you do to upset them?" rather than, "Oh, you poor thing, I will take care of it." It makes a big difference. How we help others to mature says a lot about our own maturity and remembering how we learned the lessons. Learning how to cope with an unreasonable schedule by sitting down with the boss and coming up with a solution is the way to go. You don't need to take Dad along for the interview. Meeting the deadline for 3 papers on the same Monday morning takes planning and hard work and little sleep on the weekend, but it teaches the student that it can be done. Taking on the seemingly impossible and succeeding demonstrates that one can and one does. And in overcoming your own temptations to avoid unpleasantness and be nice whatever the cost, you succeed in becoming the kind of person both you and God want you to be. Well, prayer works in much the same way. Too often we assume that having gotten down on our knees and made an appropriate petition to the Almighty, good things are about to result from our having honored the source of all power. And since we are assured that God hears every prayer, why is it that sometimes it feels like you've been talking to a vacuum? No response. Nothing. The new job doesn't happen. The promotion goes elsewhere. The grades aren't going to get you into university. All your friends are in another class. You aren't pregnant, or you are. So what's the point in prayer if all you are going to get is silence? Well, God, like any good parent, knows that the best answer sometimes is silence, because you need to think this over. Or it's no, because what you are asking is not what you need, or you aren't ready for it yet, or it is just not on the books. And like so many other things, we're inclined to remember what we feel were wrongs done to us rather than what we did or the blessings received. Much as we'll say, why did God let this happen when a good person's dead far too young, or when a country is overtaken by villains who bind the women in another century, or discrimination thrives or the fires of war glow? We tend to disregard the human element that brought about these things, and that it is now up to the human element to fix it. This is our world. What God does is give us the strength, the courage, and the resources to make amends, to fix things, if we'll only take up the challenge, instead of waiting for miracles to fall from heaven and do our work for us. He gives us what we need, not what we expect, not what we demand. Growing up is a lifelong process. Success blooms from roots planted and nourished in childhood, the lessons learned, the blossoming faith, the trials and tribulations met and overcome, the relationships that work and those that fail, the work and the play and the education and the occupations all go into making one the kind of person that can say no to themselves when it is important and necessary, and to delay gratification for appropriate times and places. And then they can enjoy the rewards and the benefits of being a fully rounded person who knows that their self-imposed limitations are, and find in them a glorious challenge to push against throughout life. Enjoy these lessons of God. So may it be. Amen. Well, if you are looking for something to say yes to, may I suggest you say yes to subscribing to my thoughts on YouTube, or share a copy with a friend. If they're interested, I'd be happy to add them to my mailing list, or they can subscribe. The numbers willing to be indoors is ever changing, and as we head back to real church time, it is a challenge to know who will still be listening to my thoughts and worshiping online, or who will opt for listening to real life preaching. I'll keep you posted.